had just had breakfast with them, and then bringing it all together with wisdom that was deeply profound while also being grounded in everyday life experience. I had just never seen this happen before. It was also immediately clear in that moment how deeply humble, self-deprecating, and funny he was. And you could tell by the way he talked about ideas that his fundamental disposition towards the world was capacious, but also it was endlessly kind, so kind. It was generous without bounds, and all of it was inspired what felt like rushing waters of love that seemed to pour out of him with stunningly authentic ease. He loved being with us. You could just tell, sitting there as a student. He loved every person sitting in the room, and he loved the topics that he was touching on. In all ways, he was so deeply human, and yet he embodied a disposition of a kind of spirit that I had not experienced in my life. Now, for those of you sitting here today who know him as a colleague, as a student, as a fellow activist, as a mentor, as a towering prophetic voice, you know that what I am describing is absolutely not hyperbolic. This is who Cornel West is. And now, for 40 years, I have had the blessing of calling him my teacher and my friend. There is so much to say about his academic career, but I want to highlight instead some other parts of Cornel. You know this if you've sat in a class with him, but he loves his family, his sisters and brother, his beautiful children, his lovely partner. And he also loves this place we live in collectively, with a passion that led him to devote a grueling and yet beautiful year and a half of his life to running for our nation's highest office. Yes. Giving us vision for what we could be and warning us always about the magnitude of the democratic collapse we were headed towards as a nation. And in the midst of all of this, he delivered the most prestigious lectures in the field of philosophy and religion, the Gifford Lectures at the University of Edinburgh, entitled A Jazz-Soaked Philosophy for Our Catastrophic Times. The applause for those lectures continues still and will, quite literally, for centuries. So this afternoon, I know that we will once again, all of us, have that experience. I had the first time I hear it, and I still have every time he speaks. How is it possible that a human like this exists in this universe? Dear Union community, I give to you Union's beloved professor and friend, Dr. Cornel West.
My God, you can tell she is my very dear sister. Very much so. Sister Sandra, we want to thank you for your leadership. Give it up for our dear sister. Every week, high quality, all the wonderful voices. And Serene, it's true, those 41 years ago that we encountered each other in New Haven. Oh, God has been blessing us. We still here. And your magnificent leadership, visionary and prophetic witness as president of an institution of higher learning. It could be a college, university. It is the unique Union Theological Seminary. And we know you are on the move and on your way. But the legacy that you leave and the work that you have done will endure. Let us give it up for our dear sister. Yes, indeed. Professor President Serene Jones. And we both come from Oklahoma. Who would have thought? You got your cowboy boots on the ground, kicking up dust. Indeed. Oh, yeah, where those fans at? 803 Fresh is alive at Union. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out this morning. I'm just so very, very humbled and blessed to be here. I hope I can say something that unsettles you, that pushes you, maybe unnerves and unhouses you. Brother Dave, thank you for being so patient and flexible in terms of facilitating my being here. But I want to begin on a very truthful note, which is to say I am a cracked vessel just trying to love my crooked neighbor with my crooked heart. W.H. Auden is right. And I recall when I walked through these gates and walked through these doors in 1977, I was in just 23 years old, a young assistant professor. I knew that I was in consecrated space. Union Theological Seminary is a very special place with all of its faults, with all of its foibles. I can say to you from the bottom of my heart that it has enriched my life. I am who I am because somebody loved me. Somebody cared for me. Somebody tended to me. And yes, it began with Irene B. West and Clifton West. That's mom and dad. I'll never be one half the human beings that they are. And yes, my brother Cliff and Cynthia and Cheryl and Reverend Willie P. Cook, who baptized me at 8 years old on the chocolate side of Sacramento at Shiloh Baptist Church. He is from Brookhaven, Mississippi. And I intend to be faithful unto death. I'm going down as a fallible, finite, fallen follower of a Palestinian Jew named Jesus, with all of the atrocities and barbarities associated with institutional Christianity. Somehow I still find in those narratives that have to do with that particular Jewish brother something that touches my heart and something that gives me reason to keep moving. The great William James, who's probably the most adorable and certainly the most original of all American philosophers, didn't have a BA degree, didn't have a PhD, didn't have a MA. He had an MD, medical degree. But he ended up the greatest American philosopher in terms of creativity. Now we got Charles Sanders Peirce, John Dewey, and a few others who were competitive at that level, given the obtuse and very abstract discourses that we associate with academic philosophy. But he said in those gifted lectures that he gave in 1901, at the center of the human condition is the call for help. The acknowledgement of our own inadequacies. The acknowledgement that our claims about autonomy are relative and contextual, that sooner or later life is going to knock you to your knees and you will call for help. Now, the greatest rendition of this was a magnificent literary artist named Nathaniel West. It's really Nathaniel Weinstein, but he renamed himself to get into Tufts University. And then Brown, but he wrote a magnificent story called Miss Lonely Hearts. He said, I want to write a novella that fuses William James and Dostoevsky in a comic strip. And Miss Lonely Hearts was like Ann Landers, the people who were calling for help, writing in letters, help me for this, I don't have a nose, kind of echo of Nikolai Go. Help me, I just went through a relationship. Help me, I've been betrayed. Help me, I'm dealing with certain forms of oppression and subjugation and degradation. And that first chapter of Miss Lonely Hearts is help, exclamation point. Help, exclamation point. And when you decide to call for help and then decide to pursue the way of helpfulness. You are fusing a humility and a tenacity, because humility is the benchmark of spiritual maturity. I didn't say self-righteousness. I didn't say self-exaltation. I said humility. And I didn't say Socratic self-examination either. Because as much as we love Socrates, oh, what a grand exemplar of intellectual conscience, intellectual integrity, intellectual courage. We know he never sheds a tear. And anybody who's never shed a tear has never loved anybody. Give me Jeremiah. I'm sure Esther with the person, she has shed a tear. I'm talking about Esther in the biblical text, not Professor Esther Amari, our beloved colleague. Jesus weeps. Oh, such profound two words. Because at the center of who we are as human beings is our wrestling with our fears and insecurities and anxieties. And there's no way of even talking about prophetic witness in catastrophic times unless you are fortified enough to be a long distance runner, so that your move from your mama's womb to tomb is one that has an integrity, honesty, decency, and a courage, but always a humility as a form of, in the language the great John Coltrane, being that force for good, or force for what our dear brother Gary Dorian talks about and knows about more than anybody I know, the King legacy and the black social gospel, force for the kingdom. Yes, indeed. Now, I want to zero in on prophetic consciousness, and I cannot think of prophetic consciousness without invoking and examining very briefly one of the greatest and towering figures of prophetic witness and prophetic reflection of the barbaric and catastrophic 20th century. I'm talking about the incomparable Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, professor right across the street. In November 10th of 1965, he stepped across the street after Union faculty had met and had to change its bylaws and constitutions and say, we can have a non-Christian, a visiting professor at Union. We have confined ourselves to just Christians. And of course, he wasn't just Christians. We had to wait for the great Raymond Brown, who was my dear colleague and brother, in 1971 to become a Catholic professor at a Protestant seminary. Oh my God. But in 65, you had the first non-Christian in Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And he's right in this space. No religion is an island. But what usually is overlooked is, he said, the largest ecumenical movement of our time is nihilism. As Christians, whatever denomination and non-denomination, as Jews, whatever variety of the rich tradition of Judaism, as Muslims, and he does make references to Muslims. There's a wonderful dialogue with Sister Serene and Brother John the Domino and Arnie Eisen. I was looking at that the other night, 50th anniversary, right in this space on precisely that essay. That essay is a watershed moment, not just in the history of this institution, but it is a watershed moment in the history of forms and varieties of spirituality, trying to fortify ourselves against the escalating nihilisms. And what is nihilism? It's not some abstract doctrine about there is no truth. No, it is the concrete experience of lovelessness, of meaninglessness, of touchlessness, of feeling as if there is no reason to proceed in space and time. Now, I know today is Suicide Prevention Day. And suicide is not always the logic of nihilism. No, most nihilists are breathing, the quick. And it's precisely that nihilism that Rabbi Heschel was talking about, that echoes Thrasymachus versus Socrates in Plato's Republic. Might means right. Power dictates morality. We do and say anything we want with no accountability, no answerability, no responsibility whatsoever. We're not even hypocrites, because hypocrisy is a tribute that vice pays a virtue. So at least the hypocrites acknowledge what virtue is. They just choose vice. No, gangsters, thugs have no standards, have no claims about virtue, proceed as if all of life is about the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. That's why there's an intimate relation between nihilism and fascism. And nihilism and fascism in our day is not new for we human beings. Most of the history of our species is the history of organized greed and weaponized hatred and institutionalized indifference toward the weak and the vulnerable. And Rabbi Heschel used to say all the time that indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. Callousness, the coarsening of the conscience, the hardening of the heart. And so, yes, we're living in an increasingly nihilistic and fascistic time, absolutely, but we got a long, long, long history. This is what Hegel meant when he said history is a slaughter bench, a slaughterhouse. This is what Edwin Gibbon meant when he put pen to paper and wrote that magisterial decline and fall of the Roman Empire in 1776. He said history is nothing but the register of human crimes and follies. And here we at Union decide that we are fundamentally committed to interruptions and eruptions of love and justice and tenderness and sweetness and kindness in a dominant historical orientation of our species, which is systems of domination, systems of oppression, systems of subjugation. And in many ways, one of the major challenges these days is wrestling with misanthropy. What makes us think that human beings even have the capacity to love truth, to love beauty, and to act on it, to love goodness and the holy, and to act on it? Here comes Rabbi Heschel. He says, I got a conception of the prophetic that's grounded in an analysis of piety, which is the first public essay he wrote in March of 1942 when he set foot in this place, running against Jew-hating Europe in March of 1940. And an analysis of piety was what? Resistance, but no resistance without reverence, but reverence grounded in remembrance. Any resistance without reverence is empty. It's nothing but sounding brass and tinkling cymbal. But any resistance without deeper remembrance is ahistorical and doesn't understand the degrees to which there's long, long historical practices of the wretchedness of the human species. That's us. But also the wonderfulness of the human species. That's those who choose to create moments of interruption in the dominant tendencies of organized greed and weaponized hatred and institutionalized indifference to the weak and vulnerable. And yes, it could be any group or persons. Now, I come from a particular tradition of a hated black people for 400 years. But the best of my tradition has always decided to teach the world something about love, especially for all the love poured into me. So it's just not me. I had so much love poured into me, I couldn't get to the crack house if I wanted. I tried to make some efforts every once in a while, but that's piety too. Piety is not blind obedience to rigid rules. Piety is not uncritical deference to dogma. Piety is the virtuous acknowledgement of the sources of good and beauty in our lives from mama's womb to tomb. You see, that's why our secular brothers and sisters can be very pietistic. John Dewey's great essay, Reflections of Common Faith, talks about piety. Dewey, right across the street at Columbia, how you gonna be pietistic? Because I recognize the sources of good in my life, and even though I am a naturalist and an atheist, I know I do not exist. I have a call for help. So the question is, are we gonna be honest about ourselves and acknowledge the fiduciary dimension of the human condition? And the fiduciary dimension is forms of trust connected to the ways in which we can fall back on the reliable and the trustworthy. And one of the distinctive features of our day, of any moment of escalating nihilism and connected to fascism, is the shattering of trust. And once you shatter trust, all the chattering in the world has no anchorage. It has no anchor. And trust is something that you earn over time. See this in the history of jazz. You got Bill Evans on the piano. He's a vanilla brother. You got Miles Davis blowing his horn. And people say, oh, it's nice to see the white ally in the band. No, he's not a white ally. He's in the band. He doesn't turn to Bill Evans and say, now the white ally is going to play a solo. Coltrane has just blown his solo. No, Bill, do your thing. Because they're in a context of struggle. They've generated bonds of trust, and they're lifting their voices, refusing to be echoes. And when you lift your voice, you examine the dark corners of your own soul, and it takes more courage to do that than it does to be a soldier on the battlefield. That's what prophetic witness is about. Not just acting as if you're on the cutting edge of justice. No, not at all. And when Hashem came over in 1965, the Union hadn't yet hired a black professor until C. Eric Lincoln got here in 67, and then James Cone, our dear brother James Cone, in 69. Hadn't had a woman professor. The next year, Beverly Harrison, my dear sister, who I love so very, very much. And then after that, Ann Ulanoff in 67. And thank God that we've got some magnificent brothers and sisters who are not part of the Christian tradition, but constitutive of this seminary. I'm talking about Professor Esther Hamari. Give it up for this sister. Give it up for this sister here. Part of their rich legacy. I'm talking about Jerusha Rhodes. I don't know whether she's here or not, but give it up for Sister Jerusha. Brother Snyder, Gary Snyder, the Buddha, yes. That's union maturing and growing and developing, but it can generate an identity crisis if it's not rooted in a deep sense of your calling and your vocation. If it's not rooted in a deep commitment to forms of remembrance and reverence and resistance. And when I talk about those 3 R's, I'm not just talking about something external, because prophetic witness is fundamentally about not just speaking truth to the powerful, but it's also a matter of trying to speak the truth to the relatively powerless, because they've got a struggle of greed and hatred going on in the battlefield of their own souls too. And most importantly, it's a matter of trying to speak the truth about yourself, because you got a battlefield where a civil war is taking place with the greed in me and the hatred in me. See, I learned at Shiloh Baptist Church. I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm just a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. I learned in Vacation Bible School, if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave a little heaven behind. That's the sign of being a follower of Jesus of Nazareth. They're going to one of those still locked into that love stuff that makes no sense whatsoever in the eyes of the world. It's just foolish, and the Jewish brother Paul telling us that, or it's just folly in the language of the great Erasmus. That's exactly right. It is foolish. It is folly, but it's a wonderful way of being, but it's on the way to the cross. Cross, symbolically, a sign of unarmed truth and unconditional love. Theologically, for those of us who are Christian, holding on for dear life with our Christology, saying we still find in that cross a power dealing with the absurd, dealing with the irrational, but believing that that absurdity is still the most alluring way of being in the world. Prophetic witness. Pietistic, but last but not least, I've gone on too long, I've come to learn and listen as well in our dialogue. The poetic. Heschel was a poet. His first book, 26 years old, was called The Ineffable Name of God. Man. Oh, that's very Hasidic, isn't it? Profoundly Hasidic. Like the Baal Shem Tov. Everywhere you go, it's like Louis Armstrong. Joy overflowing, love overflowing. But it's beyond language, it's beyond utterance, it's beyond sentences, it's beyond propositions. It's a way of life. It's choosing to go that way. The way of love, the way of justice. And justice ain't nothing but what love looks like in public, just like tenderness ain't nothing but what love feels like in private. That way of love. And the poetic is not simply for him or her who feel as if you have to write verse. No, when Shelley ends up saying poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, he's not talking about versifiers. He's talking about all of those who muster the courage to have imagination and empathy to authorize a better future. So we become artists of living and poets of existing. So poetry has everything to do with drama and semantic density, a thickness of meaning, not just with words on the page, but with your life, your deeds, your thoughts, your memories, your encounters, your relations, your interactions. Poetic in the deepest sense. Ooh, that's Heschel. That's Heschel. What does Brother Arnie say in that dialogue with you, Sister Serene? Personal integrity is the first thing you felt. And I've been blessed to know his magnificent daughter, Susanna Heschel, who's a prophetic figure in her own right. She's teaching at Harvard this year. Harvard is in deep need. A prophetic witness. Let's be honest, though. You know, we're in a situation now. The government is basically funding fascism, funding genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Money's tied to policies driven by a nihilism, an indifference, a callousness. And some of us will go down swinging. Our Israeli brothers and sisters are precious. We understand their predicament. But a Palestinian baby has exactly the same value as an Israeli baby. So when Heschel lectured in 1948 in April, reading about the Jewish Irgun, the group that had killed 100 Palestinians in one day, he stepped behind the lectern with tears in his eyes. JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary. He said, I want you to know that as a Jew, those Arabs and Palestinians have the same value as we do. I cannot lecture today as personal integrity. We're not talking about narrow politics and ideology. We're talking about human connection. And our challenge is, how do we engage in prophetic witness without getting caught into the Manichaeans of the isms? So we think all the good is on our side and all the bad is on the other side. Not at all, not at all. But we also have to be willing to raise our voices. And we're in a moment of deep fear because everybody's running scared. Trump weaponizing all that he can weaponize. And of course I say to my dear brother Trump, oh, I come from a tradition where we are not intimidated. We know that empires come and go. We know that emperors and kings and presidents come and go. And you're not gonna push us in the gutter of hate. And you're not gonna make us drink of the bitterness of greed and act as if it's normal or natural. We're going to cut against the grain. We're going to be in the world, but not of the world. And we're going to go down swinging. Because as Duke Ellington used to say, and I'm sure Hesher would agree, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. And that swing is a love swing. It's a justice swing. It's a tenderness swing. And for me, coming out of the black tradition, it is a soulful swing. Because soul ain't nothing but the sharing of a soothing sweetness against the backdrop of catastrophe so that you are more fortified to be a prophetic witness before the worms get your body. And you go down with a smile, with a little style. Put a smile on your grandmama's face and make sure that your grandchild understands you did the best that you could do in the time that you had with the limited resources and capacity given to you, and you embraced all that you could and made your mistakes as well. What a wonderful way to be in the world. That's what Heschel understood. And when he died at 65, living on 425 Riverside here, they say his body looked like he was 85 years old. It's almost like Charlie Parker, who died in his mid-30s. They thought he was 65. Martin Luther King died. They thought he was 62. He was just 39. He gave it all. I call that kenosis, but we won't get into that right now. Empty yourself. Give everything. What a wonderful way of being in the world. Thank you all so very much. We'll have a good time. We'll have a good time for questions.
We have a few minutes for questions.
Absolutely.
Maybe 2 questions. Anyone? No questions. Oh my goodness, he told us everything. Okay, here we go.
Oh, well, that's my dear brother, my very dear brother there. And he's graduating, you say, this year, right, my brother?
Oh, let's pray for that. Quite naturally, with you, it's all about love. You mentioned Coltrane. I was expecting you to say a love supreme and go into that.
Oh, yeah, no, brother. We were doing Love Supreme. We'll be here until late tonight. Definitely. But I will say this, you know, a couple of days ago, the 95th birthday of the greatest living jazz musician. His name was Sonny Rollins. He and Coltrane, May 24th, 1956, went into the studio and made Tenor Madness. The only time they were there together. Those are 2 greatest tenor saxophonists of their day. And then the backdrop is Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins. But Coltrane and Sonny are very much linked to one another. Because again, you talk about love supreme, you're not talking about it just as an individual. You're talking about in relation to a community, in relation to a tradition. And it's not all about the music, it's what the music points to. The music is simply a way of allowing one's soul to be expressed, touching other souls, but it's tied with a reverence that's bigger than all of those souls. And of course, for Coltrane, it's God. He was a post-Christian. He was shaped by M.E. Zion Church. His father was a great minister in prison and incarcerated by the governor because of his struggles against vicious forms of white supremacy. But his music is so rooted in that love that you're talking about. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the story about Coltrane, you know, when he got to Philadelphia and he was blowing his horn so much, Coltrane lost his father and his grandfather and his favorite aunt within a matter of months. He was just a teenager. So he was blowing his horn as if he could bring them back. When he got to Philadelphia in the projects with his beloved mother, Alice, that the committee voted to vote all the Coltrane family out because the brother's blowing his horn all day and all night. And, you know, people, working class people trying to get a rest and so forth. So 2 days before they getting ready to boot him out, got a knock on the door. They said, well, what's that? And it was a Baptist minister who had a church right down the street from the projects. And he said, Mrs. Coltrane, I hear that your son is making a lot of noise and they about to push y'all out. He said, that's right. He said, here, take this. That's the keys to my church. He said, you give them to your son. So anytime he wants to blow day or night, just come to the church, open up the door, and blow. That's love supreme. On the ground. There is no giant and genius Coltrane without that nameless preacher who out of deep love allowed him to be true to his calling and his vocation. And I'm sure all of us have people like that in our lives that loved us, affirmed us, enabled us, empowered us in a very, very powerful, powerful way. And it's a beautiful thing. So when we talk about love supreme, it's not, people think, oh, the music is just so sublime. No, you're missing the point. Don't fetishize the music. You hear Aretha, when you hear Teddy Pendergrass or Curtis Mayfield, yes, the music is genius-like, but don't fetishize the music. They talk about something bigger than them. The Art of the Fugue of Bach, bigger than them. Brahms' Requiem, bigger than them. Something is going on that has to do with the great T.S. Eliot called the raid on the inarticulate, the ineffable. And that's bodily. Yes, our feminist scholars taught us much. We needed it. It's corporeal. It is historical. It is social. It is temporal. And yes, it's also political. But in the end, it's moral and spiritual. And that's one of the reasons why, of course, you know, the black musical tradition is probably the greatest modern tradition of spiritual fortitude and artistic genius and moral courage, because under the auspices of the American Empire, it's been able to spread all around the world, and people can feel the authenticity, the for realness, the ways in which it empowered not just black people on chocolate sides, but empowers people no matter who they are, because it speaks to the depth of their humanity, tied to something bigger than them. And believe me, it's revolutionary these days to get people outside of their narcissism. And it's subversive these days to just try to be a decent person. That's the level of spiritual decay and moral decrepitude that we're living in right now. It really is. And it's not solely among the in the Republican Party. It cuts across the culture. The Republican Party just happen to be in power with old brother gangster Trump running things. But if Trump died tomorrow, the empire is still in decay. People are deferring, capitulating. Thank God, our dear Sister Serene, standing strong as president of an institution of higher learning. Do you know what that takes? Tremendous prophetic witness at this moment, not in the spirit of self-righteousness, but because she learned something growing up, being educated, being shaped, and saying, I just want to be a person of integrity, honesty, and decency, even as president at Union Theological Seminary. And I just pray that that's not oxymoronic. And it isn't. It means you walk a tightrope. It means you walk a tightrope. That's exactly right. And we appreciate that. Taking that stand, these other presidents capitulating day in and day out. You say, Lord, have mercy. What's going on? As Marvin Gaye would say. I know it's getting late though. What time is it, my dear
That's
sister?
it. That's it.
Oh,
We-
all right. We got to go. We
Thank
in with
you
Marvin
so
Gaye. We in with
much.
Marvin Gaye.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Appreciate you so much. Dr. West, everybody.